Chapter 15. Thomas glanced at his watch as he hurried down the long corridor at the FBI headquarters. It was 12:45 p.m., so he had about 10 minutes to make the meeting. He was anxious and nervous at the same time. This was his first real case in his new position. Since his graduation from college, Toby decided it would be better to use his actual name instead of his nickname. He didn't think his co-workers would take him seriously as Toby. So, henceforth, he was known at the academy and his work as Thomas. With his high grades and honors, Thomas was eventually accepted by the FBI as a psychological profiler. It had taken him several years as a field agent to get there, but it was well worth the wait. So Thomas, Marlena, and their two daughters, Jessie and Kelly, moved to Washington, D.C. to begin their new lives. Thomas didn't like the idea of leaving his mother in Oklahoma, but he knew Nate would take good care of her. With lots of hugs and kisses and tears, the little family was ready to set off on their new adventure. "You should just count your blessings, Mom, that I was able to stay in Oklahoma as a field agent as long as I did," Toby had reminded his mother. They were standing in the backyard on a warm summer's evening, watching the fireflies hover above the pond. "I know, but I'll miss you guys," Maddie said. She and Toby stood together, holding hands and missing each other already. He was thinking of her now as he hurried to his meeting. He rushed into the conference room and took a seat near the back. Opening his notebook, he placed his pen on the paper, ready to go. "Agent Edwards, please come up front." The director was pointing at the front row. The room was medium-sized, with 5 rows of seats facing a small screen and a small rectangle table. A pedestal was to the right for the speaker. There were no windows, and only the one door in the back. Thomas gathered his things and meekly took a seat up front. "That's better," the director said. "Since this will be your case, Mr. Edwards, it wouldn't do for you to miss a thing, now would it?" He handed Thomas a huge file as he sat down. "Let's get started, shall we?" Thomas looked around the room and tried to recognize everyone. There were 7 in all. He knew most of them. The director, John Green, was of normal height and build, with graying temples, wire-rimmed glasses, and teeth that completely filled his mouth. When he spoke, it created a lisping sound. 2 field agents sat next to Thomas, both female, Carrie Clark and Josephia Marzonia. Carrie was a blonde and wore her hair pulled back, but Josephia had short cropped black hair. He smiled at them both, but they ignored him and looked directly at the director. Also present was Dr. Philip Thurston. He was the real psychologist in the bunch, but was so far out in left field that Thomas wondered if the man ever came into the benches. Talking to the doctor was like trying to speak a foreign language. The other 3 gentlemen Thomas did not know. "Agent Edwards," the director went on, "I know you have not had a chance to review the files, but neither have the others, except for our 3 field agents here. You probably haven't met them since they're usually on assignments. This is Agent Prowler, Agent Owens, and Agent Snyder." Thomas nodded to the 3 agents, and they nodded back. The director continued, "I'm sure you've heard on the news about the death of the senator from Ohio. At first, we thought it was an accident, but after analyzing what little evidence we have, our conclusion is that he was murdered." Thomas was interested now and sat up straighter in his chair. He remembered hearing about Senator Wilson's death on the evening news. Marlena was sure it had been a murder right from the start, even though the reporters had stated it was an accident. "People don't bathe with their radios next to their tubs anymore," Marlena had said, "and those new bathroom sockets have that breaker thing in them. It would have cut off a surge of electricity as soon as the radio hit the water." Thomas heard his wife's conclusions echoing in his head. "Agent Edwards, are you with us?" the director asked sternly, waking him from his thoughts. "Sorry, sir, I was just thinking about my wife had said about the whole thing." "And what would that be?" "She thought something was funny about it, that's all, sir." He felt a little foolish now for mentioning his wife. "Let me continue. That is, if we can keep Agent Edwards awake." A picture flashed up on the screen of the senator in his bathroom, dead in the tub. There was a radio floating in the water, still plugged into the outlet. His eyes were wide and fixed toward the ceiling. His mouth hung open. His skin was burnt, almost as though the water had reached the boiling point. Other pictures of the crime scene were also flashed. The director spoke again. "Agent Edwards, this is your case now. We have very few leads, but we do have the coroner's findings. He believes that Senator Wilson died from electrocution and the associated burns. We first thought it to be an accident. However, after discussions with the maids, we discovered that the senator never took a bath. He only showered. We also discovered this in his bathroom." The director held up a clear bag that contained something lime green. "This is a negligee, and it does not belong to any of his current girlfriends, nor his wife. There's obviously a new one out there somewhere we don't know about. We believe that whoever wore this may also have murdered the senator. We need you to work with this group to solve the case." Thomas looked around the room at the other agents. They all had very stern expressions. The director added to the seriousness of the atmosphere. "May I remind you, Agent Edwards, that this is a United States Senator we're talking about." Chapter 16. Maddie sat at the table with her head in her hands. She was totally terrified for the first time in many years. She knew she had messed up and was deeply concerned about how this would end. Her life ran through her mind. That terrible error. Toby, Nate, Charlie, and the agency. What will they ask of me now? Maddie was sitting with Dr. Jeff Lewis, the head of the agency, her husband Nate, and several other people. She was shaking, and Nate touched her shoulder. For the first time in their relationship, he did not know how to comfort her. Jeff continued with his interrogation. "Maddie, tell us again exactly what happened." She began to cry. "I've told you everything." "Miss Edwards," Dr. Greckhardt said, "we must know every detail if we are to protect you." "Maddie, we'll get you out of this," Nate whispered in her ear. "We won't leave you alone." "No, we will not," Jeff agreed. He put his hand on her shoulder. "I sent you on this mission, and I will not leave you. I feel it's all my fault." The agency was placed on high alert for the first time in over 20 years that night. Maddie did not go home either. The interrogation continued throughout the night and into the following days. They had to decide on what course of action to take. Above all, the agency had to stay ahead of the FBI's investigation. Chapter 17. Thomas and his field agents were deep in thought in the small room with no windows that they were given for their investigation. 2 small tables were pushed together in the middle of the room with several chairs scattered about. The walls were covered with pictures of the crime scene along with the typed words of witnesses. A sketch of the floor plan of the senator's house was also displayed, as well as the outside gardens. From floor to ceiling, the walls held the various clues as to who murdered the senator. There were stacks of files and empty coffee cups on the tables. Crumpled, discarded papers littered the floor, and the trash cans were overflowing. 2 phones sat soundless in the middle of the tables. "Come on, guys, there has to be something here," Thomas said, his eyes trailing through the various pictures now on display. Agent Clark brushed her hair from her eyes. "We've gone through everything. There's nothing." They all stared at each other, wondering what to do next, when Agent Owens rushed into the room, all excited. "Hey, guys! Ho, ho, ho!" "It's a little early for Christmas, isn't it, Terry?" Thomas asked as Owens smiled and held up a tape. Agent Marzonia entered, pushing a cart with a television. As the door closed behind her, she plugged it into the closest socket and hit the on button. The television sprang to life, and a snowy screen and the sound of static. Agent Owens popped in the tape and hit the play button. "What's this?" Carrie asked. "What we've been waiting for," Josephia said with a smile. "The surveillance tape from the senator's house." They sat in silence as the static quieted, and a silent movie played before them. The film showed the front door of the senator's mansion and then the front gate. About a 10-second viewing of each, alternating front door, front gate, front door, front gate. "Oh, this is real exciting," Agent Prowler growled. "I can't wait for the whole plot to unravel right before our eyes." "Quiet," Carrie said scornfully. Have some patience." "Quiet for what? It's a silent movie," he sneered back. and patience they needed. They had over 20 tapes to watch, each with over 2 hours of play. It was the most boring thing Thomas had ever experienced, watching a tape of a front door and a driveway gate, switching back and forth. Ever so often, someone, such as a maid, would come or go, but nothing more. For 3 days, the small group watched the boring videotapes. They threw chips at each other or gossiped about the latest rumor floating about the office. But other than that, nobody had much of interest to say. Thomas wondered if this was what his career would be like for the next 20-some years. Was this what he worked so hard for at college? Then suddenly, Carrie cried out, "Who's that?" "Yeah, who in the hell is that?" Thomas asked, sitting up in his chair, munching on the potato chip he was about to throw at Josephia. "Stop the tape!" An individual in a rather heavy coat and hat was entering the front gate, but whoever it was never entered the house through the front door. "When was this taken?" Thomas asked. Agent Snyder answered, "Last month. Why?" "Who in the hell wears a heavy coat in July? That's why," Thomas declared. They all knew they had their man. "Bingo!" Carrie yelled, smiling. "Now, let's get to work." It was all they needed to pique their interest and remotivate their small group. Thomas gave out assignments as to who needed to interview whom. They would talk to everyone at the senator's work, both in Ohio and D.C. "We'll go back a year if we have to," Thomas said. "I want to know every person that senator ever spoke to or had anything to do with. I want every film footage or picture ever taken. I want to know everything." They would delve into the senator's private life as well as his financial, political, and personal affairs. "I want to know everything that man did for the last 12 months, Thomas demanded. He was serious. He would find the killer even if it took him the next 20 years. Chapter 18. Thomas and Carrie flew to Ohio to meet with the senator's staff at his home office. Agent Marzonia and Prowler drove to the senator's office in D.C. to do the same. Agent Owens was seeking out film footages from the various television stations, and Agent Snyder hit the papers and magazines. For the next several weeks, these agents would be busy, very busy. "I hate to fly," Carrie told Thomas as the stewardess served the drinks. "Coffee, please," Thomas said, "with lots of cream and sugar." "A soda, no ice," Carrie muttered. "It's beautiful out there. Look at those clouds," Thomas declared, leaning over Carrie to gaze out the window. "How can you dislike this?" "It's not the view. It's the idea of a sudden stop that bothers me." He smiled and tried to comfort her by getting her mind busy thinking of other things other than the bumpy flight they were on. For the rest of their brief time, they talked about their families and what got them interested in working for the FBI. Their time aboard the plane was short, only about an hour once the plane was in the air. Just enough time for a quick drink, some friendly conversation, and then the landing. This, of course, pleased Carrie greatly. Once back in an airport lobby, she was glad to have her feet planted on solid ground. They gathered their luggage and climbed into the rental car. After checking into their hotel, there was time to visit the senator's office and see for themselves exactly where he worked and spent most of his life. They parked the car across the street from the Senate building on South High Street and studied the place. "Looks like one of our buildings in D.C., Carrie noted. "Nothing much spectacular here." "I heard the insides are pretty impressive," Thomas said. "Want to check it out?" As they climbed the stairs to the front of the building, a group was forming for the final afternoon tour, so they decided to join in and see what information they could get the easy way. They were just in time. The female tour guide had just said, "We'll walk to the back now and enter." The group followed her around to the back of the building. Carrie and Thomas were the last to enter, and they were instantly mystified by what they saw. "My God, this is absolutely beautiful," Carrie declared. The tour guide laughed. "We get that reaction from our visitors all the time. It is truly spectacular, isn't it?" She continued to lecture about the building's history as Carrie and Thomas stood hypnotized, glaring at the magnificent view in front of them. 2 immense marble staircases followed both sides of the circular room to the second floor, as slender sculptured columns cascaded down from the 30-foot ceiling, framing the upper opening, with a flair of Italian architecture. Carrie stood silently, completely enveloped in an overpowering spiritual reverence. As the tour guide continued to describe the building's history, everything melted into the background noise of Carrie's mind. We're standing under the staircase of the Grand Stair Hall. They're constructed of white Italian marble and are strikingly similar to the staircase in the Paris Opera House. During the renovation, the marble required months of cleaning. Before the restoration, this pristine white marble was stained dark yellow by 90 years of coal and tobacco smoke. Yes, they allowed smoking here many years ago. Now, taboo, it was once widely accepted to smoke in public buildings. Carrie and Thomas suddenly felt honored to be standing in such a beautiful and old historic site. The tour guide continued. The 4 ceiling murals were painted by Petriti and Son of Cincinnati and represent 4 enduring themes in our Ohio culture: art, justice, manufacturing, and agriculture. After intense cleaning and repairing, the murals were also restored to their original color and beauty. If you will follow me, we will now. The guide led the group off to another room. Carrie and Thomas stayed behind, enjoying the view for a few minutes longer. Then they left the magnificent building, ran across the street, and found the information desk. They displayed their badges and were escorted to the offices of the deceased senator. His secretary met them as they entered. She introduced herself as Alice Mosher. She was in her early 60s with graying hair and beautiful blue eyes. Thomas felt that, with her strong facial features, she had been a stunning woman in her earlier days. "May we look around, Miss Mosher?" Thomas asked. "Please, and if I can answer any questions, I'll be happy to." Thomas and Carrie walked through the rooms and into the senator's office. Nothing unusual jumped out at them. The rooms had been cleaned of all lingering fingerprint, dust, and any other remains from the original investigations. Miss Mosher quietly but observantly followed them through the rooms. "One question, please, Miss Mosher," Thomas said. "Yes?" "Who works in all of these offices?" As well as the main office and the senator's office, there were 4 additional offices within the senator's suite. All were lined with hand-sculptured mahogany panels and lush velvet curtains that hung with a flare of elegance from the 14-foot windows. "The senator had various individuals on his staff," she said. "I gave a list to one of the agents when they first arrived. We conducted our work here, as well as in D.C. It just depends on what time of year it is. Is there anyone in particular you're interested in?" "I have the list here," Carrie said, handing Thomas the paper. He had already seen the list, but was more interested in what and how Miss Mosher answered his question. He needed to study her reactions as well as her answers. He handed the paper to her. "Take a look at this, Miss Mosher. How well and how long did you work with or know each person?" He watched her facial expressions as she studied the list. "I've been here for over 15 years, she said. "Let me see." She slid on her reading glasses and reviewed the names. "Well, how about if I jot down the number of years they worked for us next to their names?" While she was busy writing, Thomas studied her face. Carrie walked to the window and admired the spectacular view. The lake was only a few blocks away, and she could see parts of the city on the other side. She thought the view would be even more beautiful at night. Miss Mosher handed her finished work to Thomas. He noticed that every name had several years of service printed next to it except for one. "Who's this Maxine Thornton?" he asked. "She's only been here a few months." His question immediately gained Carrie's attention. Miss Mosher answered. "She was from a temporary agency, so we canceled the contract after—" "Well," her words trailed off. "I understand. What agency was she from, and what was she hired to do?" "Well, I'm not quite sure. She just showed up one day." This alerted the 2 agents. They continued to bombard the deceased senator's secretary with questions and discovered that about 3 months ago Maxine Thornton just arrived one day with a work request form from her temporary agency. The request had been ordered and signed by someone from Washington, D.C., so Miss Mosher simply put her to work. She told the 2 agents that Maxine became one of the senator's favorites. He seemed to take an instant liking to her. She did possess extraordinary research capabilities, Miss Mosher said. She was able to find out about anything with little or no real effort. It was almost like she had a book that contained everything that did or would happen. The whole situation seemed a little fishy to me, but it wasn't my place or in my power to say or do anything about it. I just did my job and kept quiet. "Did you tell any of our agents this?" Carrie asked. "No." "Why not?" Thomas was now very interested in this temporary agency. "I was never asked." Carrie questioned Miss Mosher about the temporary agency and was told about a local branch nearby. They would visit that branch tomorrow. A copy of the temporary agency's work order with the signature of someone in D.C. was faxed to Agent Marzona and Prowler. They were told to find out exactly who had ordered the work and why. "Did she make any friends here?" Thomas asked before they left. "Not really," Miss Mosher replied. "She kept to herself mostly. She worked very hard. I had no real complaints about her." As they descended the marble stairs, Carrie said to Thomas, "Seems rather strange that D.C. would hire a temporary person for someone in Ohio, don't you think?" "D.C. does a lot of strange things lately," Thomas said as they headed back to their hotel for dinner.